Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode 2 of Faith as Becoming. And if you haven't watched episode 1 yet, I'd strongly recommend starting there, unless you are the type of person who likes to jump in into the middle of things without having the necessary background. We're building a logical chain, step by step, and each episode builds and depends on what came before. But just to be sure, here's a quick recap of what we covered in episode 1. In episode 1, we talked about how reality is comprehensible. We can do science. And I arrived at the conclusion that the best explanation for why this is that reality itself is grounded in logos. Logos meaning divine reason and rational order. I also talked about how scientific investigation is a way of studying that divine reason. So the universe is grounded not on mindless mechanism and not random chance, but rational order as the fundamental nature of existence. Today, we're going a bit further than that. We are asking ourselves, does this logos, this rational ground of the universe, actually exist, or is it just a convenient philosophical concept, a theoretical construct that doesn't really relate to anything actually existing in the physical world? And I believe that I will show that that is not the case, that it is something that actually exists, that pure being, fully actualized, no potentiality, what philosophers call actus purus, must exist as the necessary ground of reality. It's the cosmological argument, but slightly refined. We're not saying everything needs a cause, we're saying something much more specific, and, I would argue, much more powerful. So, today, this is what we're going to cover. We'll cover Aristotle's potentiality and actuality distinction, why the difference between the two terms and why that's important. We'll discuss why quantum mechanics, for example, doesn't escape this either. We will discuss why the laws of physics themselves needs an explanation. We will discuss how pure being is the necessary ground for this explanation, and we'll address some common objections that I foresee might be popping up. So, let's get started. Aristotle, what does he have to do with anything? Aristotle made a distinction. Aristotle, that's the old ancient philosopher, tutor to Alexander the Great and everything. He made a key distinction that is fundamental to understanding reality itself. He talked about the difference between potentiality and actuality. This is philosophy, but it's not complicated at all. It's something that you already understand intuitively. I'm just putting terms to it. Let me show you. Look at this. An acorn has the potential to become an oak tree, but it's not an oak tree yet. In the same way that a big slab of marble has the potential to become a statue. But before sculpting, the statue exists potentially, not actually. And you now have the potential to stand up, walk, speak, turning off, stop listening to me and do something else. I hope you don't do that, but you have the potential to do that, but you're not doing them. That is the key distinction. The potentiality is the capacity to be something, to do something, or to become something. And actuality is actually being that thing, doing that thing, having become that thing. And everything in this physical world that we inhabit exists in both states simultaneously. Partly actual, what it currently is, and partly potential, what it could become. And this matters because of this crucial point. Potentiality cannot actualize itself. An acorn doesn't turn itself into an oak tree. It needs soil, it needs nutrients, water, warmth, the right circumstances that it can draw on to become an oak tree. In the same way, marble doesn't sculpt itself into a statue. It needs a sculptor with a hammer and chisel working away. And your potential to move or to do something else doesn't actualize itself either. It needs your brain, it needs your muscles, it needs input, something that makes you decide to do that. Which means that something already actual must actualize potential. For any potential to be actualized, something already actual must actualize it. It's not controversial. It's just describing how reality works on a fundamental level. But this has profound implications. Change requires something potential becoming actual and something already actual making it happen. Water freezes into ice because actual cold actualizes the potential of water to change into a solid. A seed sprouts because actual warmth and actual moisture actualize the potential of the seed to sprout and start growing. This means that change is defined as the movement from potentiality to actuality. Something changes from what it is to something that it can become. And that movement always requires something that is already actual. Now, if we apply this cosmologically, why does anything exist at all? Well, the universe exists. We can be fairly certain of that. The universe is actual. But it didn't always exist in current form. The universe had a beginning about 13.8 billion years ago. That's what cosmology tells us. So the universe went from potential to actual. It went from not existing to existing, from one state to another state. I will discuss the issue about time in this later. But first, we'll get to the quantum objection. Quantum mechanics. Virtual particles pop into existence from nothing. Maybe the universe emerged from quantum fluctuations. If in that case, there is no need for something actual to precede it. And this is a common objection to this. And let me show you why I would say that it doesn't work. Quantum mechanics require actualities. Quantum fluctuations don't happen in nothing. They happen in quantum vacuum states. And a quantum vacuum isn't nothing, it's something. The quantum vacuum contains laws that govern its behavior. It contains quantum fields. It contains specific mathematical structure, and it contains minimal energy, but energy. All of those are actualities. The quantum vacuum is an actual state with actual properties governed by actual laws that we can calculate. And even if we grant that particles can emerge from quantum fluctuations, we'll still need to explain several things. Where do the laws of quantum mechanics come from? Why does the quantum vacuum have the specific properties that it has? Why are there fields rather than no fields at all? Why is there mathematical structure governing this? Why can we calculate this? All of these things aren't nothings. These are somethings. These are actualities that require explanation. I want to raise this immediately here about God of the gaps. This isn't God of the gaps. I will get to why later. But saying that the universe emerged from quantum fluctuations doesn't solve the problem. It pushes it back one step. Now you have to explain where the vacuum came from, the quantum vacuum, where the laws came from, where the mathematical structure came from. You haven't escaped the need for explanation. You have just renamed what you need to explain. You've pushed it back. Let's think carefully about this. The potentiality before, what must have existed before the universe. Even as I say, before is the wrong word, since time itself began with the universe, but it's the best one we have. Where the universe came from. Whatever state the universe emerged from, it must have contained, at the very least, the potential for a universe to exist. It must have contained the potential for laws to govern it, the potential for matter and energy to emerge, the potential for structure and order. And potentiality itself is something, it is not nothing. The potential for laws to exist is not the same as the absence of everything. And the potential for structure is not the same as pure non-existence. If there was potentiality, then there was something rather than nothing. And that something requires explanation. And here's the problem that we can't escape. As we established earlier, potentiality cannot actualize itself. The potential for a universe isn't in itself enough to actually make the universe actual. And the potential for laws can't make itself into actual laws. For potentiality to become actuality, something already actual must actualize it. But then maybe there is an infinite chain of potentialities being actualized by other things. There are philosophers, Graham Oppy, for instance, who argue, yes, infinite chains are perfectly coherent. And why does the chain need to end? I would say that, remember this though, an infinite chain of potentialities being actualized still requires an actuality to actualize it at every single link in the chain. You haven't eliminated the need for something actual, you've just multiplied it infinitely. Think of it this way. A book is held up by a shelf, which is held up by a wall, which is held up by a foundation of a building, which is held up by bedrock, which is held up by, and then on and on, continuing forever. At some point, something has to just exist without being held up by something else. Otherwise, nothing in the chain has any support at all. This is the infinite regress problem, and an infinite regress of actualization is like an infinitely long chain hanging from nothing. Every link depends on the link above it, but there is no attachment point. It's like an infinite series of IOUs. I will pay you when she pays me, and she'll pay me when he pays her, and he'll pay her when they pay him, continuing ad infinitum, forever. At some point, someone actually needs money, or the whole chain is meaningless. If you've seen Escher's impossible drawings, the two hands drawing each other, or the infinite staircase that loops back on itself, it's fascinating to look at, and they look coherent on the page, but it's a trick. You can't actually build them in reality. Fantastic art, however. And similarly, infinite regress might work as an abstract logical concept, but in actual reality, something has to ground the chain. Now, you might still think it's coherent, infinite regress, and that's a genuine philosophical position. I can't prove you wrong using mathematical certainty or anything like that. I am claiming that finite grounding in pure being is more elegant, more explanatory, and more coherent. But if you think infinite chains can exist without grounding, that's perfectly fine. You and I just have a fundamental disagreement about metaphysics, and that's okay. But at least listen to my argument. If we accept the premise that infinite regress is a problem, then there must be something that is purely actual, that contains no potentiality at all. Something that doesn't need actualization because it's already fully actualized. This would be something that exists necessarily rather than contingently. And it would be the ground from which all actualization derives. This is what philosophy calls actus purus, pure actuality, and what theology calls pure being. Now, something that is purely actual, with no potentiality whatsoever, what would that be like? And let's work through this logically. Each characteristic follows necessarily from the previous one. First of all, it must be unchanging. Pure being cannot change. Why? Because change, as we said before, requires actuality. Uh, change requires potentiality. Change is the movement from potential to actual, from one state to another state, but pure being has no potentiality. It is already fully actual. Therefore, pure being, by definition, must be unchanging, immutable, and eternal in the strongest sense possible. And from this follows another conclusion. Pure being must be outside time. And the reason for this is that time is the measure of change. Past, present, and future are only meaningful concepts for things that change. Pure being doesn't change. It exists. It has no potentiality to be any different than what it is. It exists in an eternal present. Past, present, future is the same thing. It's not moving through time, but containing all of the moments within time, timelessly, at the same time, for lack of a better word. It also means that it's not composite. It cannot be made of parts, pure being. Because if something that is composite, made of parts, it has the potential to be arranged differently, to come apart, to not exist. Those parts have to be held together by something, but pure being has no potentiality. Therefore, it must be absolutely simple, not composite. It sounds like I'm arguing against the Trinity here. And we'll cover this in episode 7 when I discuss the Trinity, because this is not an argument against the Trinity. 3 persons, 3 parts? No. Persons aren't parts. They're constituted by eternal relations within one simple being. But we'll get to that eventually. I just want to get ahead of you there. Conclusion number 4. Pure being must exist necessarily. Why? Because contingent existence means could have been otherwise, which is potentiality. If something might not have existed, it has potential for non-existence. But pure being has no potentiality. Therefore, pure being must exist necessarily. It cannot not exist. It must also be self-sufficient, depending on nothing outside itself. Why? Because depending on something else means having the potential to not exist if that other thing is taken away. Pure being has no potentiality. Therefore, pure being doesn't have the capacity for non-existence, which means it must be absolutely self-sufficient, requiring nothing and depending on nothing. Sounds abstract, I know, very abstract. Pure actuality with no potentiality. It sounds like philosophical jargon that doesn't have any connection to reality at all. But stick with me here, because this abstract concept is going to lead us somewhere very specific. We're talking about metaphysics here, but it is going to connect directly to the logos that we established in episode 1, and it has remarkable consequences. So we've established that potentiality requires actuality to be actualized, that the universe involves potentiality, that infinite regress doesn't solve the problem, therefore pure actuality must exist, and that pure actuality must be unchanging, outside time, simple, necessary, and self-sufficient. Pure being the necessary ground for all existence. But what does this have to do with logos? Well, I'm glad you asked, I'll tell you. In episode 1, we established that reality is grounded in logos, reason, rational order. And now we've established that pure being, pure actuality, must exist within this framework. Are these the same thing? They must be. If pure being exists, which we've now shown, and if reality is grounded in logos, which we showed in episode 1, then pure being is logos. The necessary ground of existence is the rational order of its existence. And this matters profoundly. We have established that pure being exists and that reality is grounded in logos, and now I'm claiming that those are the same thing. Pure being is logos. This is a rigorous, crucial claim that needs defending. Could pure being exist but be arbitrary or chaotic or non-rational? In episode 3, I will show you why that's impossible, why the necessary ground must be ordered, why order cannot emerge from disorder, and why natural law expresses divine nature. But for now, just observe that, bear with me and observe this. A rational ground makes sense of a rational reality. An arbitrary ground would predict chaos, not order. The full argument comes in episode 3. We need to do this step by step, but the conclusion is pure being equals logos. Now, this pure being, fully actual, unchanging outside time, simple, necessary, and self sufficient, this is what theology calls God. Not a being among beings, not a very powerful entity within the universe, but being itself, the ground of all existence, pure actuality from which all actualization derives. And we're claiming this being is logos, rational, intelligible, the source of all order. Pure being exists. Being with a capital B. Now, this is emphatically not Zeus. It's not a super powerful being who exists in time, who changes, who has needs or desires, who can be thwarted and surprised and scheme. No. Zeus and Thor and Odin and Mars and all of these other concepts of godhood are still in becoming. He exists within the world with potentiality. He changes, he acts in time, he depends on things outside himself. Pure being is not this. Categorically different, by definition, not a creature, however powerful, but the ground of existence itself, not a being with a small b, but being with capital B. So, in these 2 episodes now, reality is grounded in logos in episode 1, and pure being exists as the necessary ground for existence in episode 2. And as I said before, in the next episode, we will prove that being must be logos, why the necessary ground cannot be arbitrary, and why natural law expresses divine nature. But before I let you go, I will address some objections. But before we do that, I'll be honest about where this argument gets controversial. Everything up to this point, that potentiality requires actuality, that the universe involves potentiality, is relatively uncontroversial. Even most physicists will grant these points. But where it gets controversial is the leap from pure actuality must exist to this is God. Modern philosophy also is deeply skeptical of Aristotelian metaphysics, the actuality potentiality duo and things like that. And it's rejected by many modern philosophers these days. Others accept it, but would definitely reject the conclusions that I'm drawing from it. I remind you again here that I'm not claiming airtight proof. Not at all. I'm not claiming I've solved the old philosophical debate that goes back 2,500 years. I'm claiming this is the most coherent explanation I've found for why anything exists at all. But reasonable people agree. Many of them more intelligent disagree. Reasonable people disagree. Many of them more intelligent than I am. And I want to engage with those objections seriously. So let's get to some of them that objections that I'm anticipating. Objection 1. Why can't universe just be brute fact? Why does it need explanation? You're allowed to say that, of course you are. No further explanation needed. But notice, be honest there about what you're doing. You are accepting that something exists without explanation. Just saying it's just how things are, no reason for it. Then you've conceded my main point there, that existence requires something that exists without needing further explanation. You've just placed that something at a different location than I do. You've placed it in the universe itself, rather than in a necessary ground for the universe. Then the question becomes, what is more plausible? As a brute fact, a universe that changes, evolves, has beginning as potentiality just popped into existence, or there exists a pure being outside of time and the universe that is unchanging, necessary, and fully actual. I like pure being. I think that's a more plausible brute fact in that case. Now, objection 2. This is just the cosmological argument, which has been refuted many times, and I would say that it's not. It's not the standard cosmological argument that says that everything needs a cause and then pushing that cause further back. I'm not claiming that. I'm not claiming that. I'm making a more specific claim, namely that potentiality requires actuality. The standard objection, then what caused God, doesn't apply here, because God, as pure actuality, has no potentiality. Therefore, it doesn't need to be caused. It doesn't need actualization. This is not special pleading. It's recognizing that things with potentiality and things with pure actuality operate under different principles. Things in becoming need causes. Pure being doesn't, because it's not in becoming. It's not changing by definition. It's not special pleading. It's proper definition. Now then, number 3. Why can't there be multiple pure actualities? Why just one God? It's a good question. Aristotle himself thought that there were multiple unmoved movers. But let's consider this. What would differentiate them from one another if there were multiple pure actualities? They can't differ in properties, because that would mean that pure actuality has a potential to be in another way, and that cannot be the case. They can't differ in location, because pure being is outside space itself. And they can't differ in time, because pure being is outside time, because time is change. If they can't differ in how they are, where they are, or when they are, they're not multiple, they're one. There can only be one pure being, one necessary ground, one God, because it would have to have the exact same properties. Now, objection 4. Even if pure being exists, why call it God? That's a huge leap, and I would say no. It's not a leap at all. It's identification. When we say God, what do we mean? In the Abrahamic, monotheistic way that most people use the term God these days, we mean the necessary ground of existence, fully actual, outside time, unchanging, self-sufficient, the source from which all else derives. And that is what we've shown exist. Now, I haven't shown that God is personal, loving, Trinitarian, or became incarnate in Jesus Christ. Those arguments will come in later episodes, and it builds on what we've already established. But we have shown that the fundamental ground of reality exists and has specific characteristics. Calling that God isn't adding something extra. It's naming what we have discovered. Now, another objection. This is too abstract. It doesn't connect to lived experience. And to this one, I would say, yes, it is abstract. We're doing metaphysics here. We're talking about the ultimate nature of reality itself. But it's also incredibly practical. If pure being exists, if God is the ground of reality itself, then that means several fascinating things. It means that your existence, you specifically, isn't an accident. It means that reality is intelligible because it's grounded in logos. It means that science is possible. And it means that meaning in the universe is real, not projected onto meaningless matter. We don't exist by accident. Uh, the abstraction that we've been working with in this episode does lead to concrete implications and conclusions, and we'll get there. But first, we need to establish the foundation that everything else builds on. Now, objection number 6, quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics shows that something can come from nothing, and I want to be thorough here. The claim is that quantum mechanics show particles popping into existence from nothing, and I mentioned this briefly before. Lawrence Krauss even wrote a book called A Universe from Nothing, arguing the universe could emerge from quantum vacuum fluctuations, and there is no need for God. And I'll show you why this doesn't quite escape the argument. What is nothing? Nothing means no quantum fields, no laws, no mathematical structure, no energy states, no space, no time, no potentiality. That's literally nothing. Quantum vacuum has fields, it has laws governing these fields, it has a mathematical structure, and it has energy states, as I mentioned before. This is something, not nothing. The nothing that Lawrence Krauss is talking about is not nothing. He's just defining it as nothing when it contains something. A physicist might say that I'm playing semantic games here. Quantum fields are fundamental. They don't need explanation. You're asking why are there laws, but that's just a brute fact. And sure, that's a coherent position. Quantum fields with their laws are the bottom level. No further explanation is possible or necessary. But I don't think it's the best position. And let me show you why. Notice what the physicist has conceded there. Something exists without needing explanation. Option 1, which is the most plausible candidate? Option 1, quantum fields with laws that are mathematical, orderly, fine-tuned, complex and contingent, none of which is explained. Why that would be the case. Or option 2, pure being that is simple, necessary, the source of all order, and self-sufficient. I think that pure being, option number 2, is by far the better candidate for unexplained foundation. Laws that are complex, specific, and mathematical seem like they themselves would require explanation. Pure being, by contrast, is what you'd expect that ultimate foundation to look like. But if you want to stop at quantum fields, you're still accepting that reality bottoms out in something unexplained. We just disagree about where that bottom is. And this brings me to the God of the Gaps. God of the Gaps is the idea that we put in God as an explanation for things that we don't understand. We don't currently know how X works, therefore God must have done X. Lightning, God, then we discover electricity. Disease, God, then we discover bacteria. Biological complexity, God, then we discover natural selection and evolution. We insert God where we don't have scientific explanations yet. And as science progresses, those gaps get filled and God becomes unnecessary. God keeps retreating and becoming smaller. Those are empirical gaps, gaps in our knowledge about how things work. That's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is fundamentally different. I'm not saying we don't know where quantum fields came from, therefore God made them specifically. I am saying even if we had a complete scientific explanation, every mechanism understood, every law known, every process in the universe mapped, the question, why is there something rather than nothing, would still remain. That's not a gap in knowledge that science can fill. That's a category question about the logical structure of existence itself. And science answers how. Philosophy asks why. Science is great at telling us what mechanisms operate, what laws govern processes, or what equations describe phenomena, and predicting the future, basically, from this. Philosophy, on the other hand, asks why there is anything for science to study at all. Why are there laws? Why is there a framework of existence? Why something rather than nothing? A complete physics textbook doesn't answer the question, why are there natural laws at all? It describes what those laws are and how they function. This isn't a gap that future physics will fill. It's a different kind of question entirely. And that's not a weakness of physics. It's just something that is not within the remit of physics. And that leads me to something crucial that I'll develop even more in future episodes as well. God doesn't operate despite natural law or against natural law. God operates through natural law. Natural law is the embodiment of God's will and God itself. So science doesn't compete with theology. They're studying the same reality from different angles. Natural law is the expression of divine logos, the divine reason. When we do physics, we're not finding alternatives to God. We're studying how God operates. We're tracing the rational structure that logos established. So, science and theology are studying the same reality but from different angles. Both of them equally valuable. Science asks, how does this mechanism work? And theology asks, why is there a mechanism at all? So, quantum mechanics doesn't escape this, because quantum vacuum isn't nothing, it's something, with laws of structure. Laws of structure which require explanation. Quantum fields are just fundamental as a position, but not a better one than pure being is fundamental. Pure being is fundamental. And again, it's not God of the gaps, it's asking a category question, not filling an empirical gap, and God operates through natural law, not against it. The quantum mechanics objection doesn't escape the need for pure being, it just describes intermediate stages. So, what have we established today? We've established that potentiality cannot actualize itself, that everything in the physical universe involves potentiality, even quantum vacuum and laws involve potentiality. Therefore, something purely actual must exist. This pure actuality must be unchanging, outside time, simple, necessary, and self sufficient. I've claimed that this pure actuality is identical with logos from episode 1, and that this is what we mean when we say God, pure being, the necessary ground for existence. Point 6 will be proven more rigorously in episode 3. So we've established the foundation for the series. We've established that reality is grounded in logos and that pure being exists as that ground. This is abstract philosophy, but it isn't just abstract philosophy. It's the groundwork for everything that follows. And as I've said many times now, in episode 3, we'll show that pure being and logos is the same thing. Why the necessary ground for existence cannot be arbitrary or chaotic, why order cannot be emergent but must be fundamental, what it means that natural law expresses divine nature, and why God cannot violate natural law without self-contradiction. Why the question, why doesn't God break his own rules, is an incoherent question. Only once we've established that connection can we go further. Okay, but why does this matter? You might be thinking, okay, pure being exists. Sure, whatever. Why is that important? Well, if the ground of reality is pure being, pure actuality, logos itself, then the reality isn't an accident. Reality isn't meaningless matter obeying blind laws. It is the expression of rational order grounded in necessary being. And that changes everything about how we understand ourselves, the universe, and what it means to be human. So, let's take a look at the chain we're building here. Reality grounded in logos and pure being exists as necessary ground. Episodes 1 and 2 are done, and pure being is logos is the next episode. After that, we'll talk about pure being outside time in episode 4. Then we'll move on to why God wanted us specifically, why God must be love, and then episode 7 and 8, we will be talking more about specifically Christian aspects of theology, why the Trinity is necessary, and why incarnation is necessary. We're building this step by step, each conclusion setting up the next. Now the fun part, your homework. If you want to do it, think about change. Any change, water freezing, a seed sprouting, your decision to watch this video. Ask yourself, what made that change happen? What actual thing actualized that potential? Then keep following it back. What actualized the thing that actualized the change? And keep going. See if you can eventually arrive at something that doesn't need actualization because it's already fully actual. That's what we've been talking about today. Now, engagement. If you found this compelling as you stuck around for this long, I'm almost impressed, especially if you listened to both episodes fully. If you found it compelling, leave a comment explaining which part clicked. If you found an error in reasoning, tell me. I'm genuinely interested in objections. I want this to be a conversation, not a lecture. If there's a better explanation that you have found or you have reasoned out for why anything exists at all, I really want to hear it. Also, before we end, a note on certainty. I'm not claiming to have proven any of this with absolute certainty. Of course not. I am claiming that if you accept potentiality requiring actuality, which I find hard to deny, and you follow where that leads logically, then pure being emerges as necessary, or at the very least, the best explanation. Could I be wrong? Of course I could be wrong. Reality could just be brute fact. It exists because it exists. It's all random. But I think that this is more coherent, more explanatory, and more elegant than all of the alternatives. And as we build through the series, you'll see how this foundation supports everything that follows. So, thank you for thinking this through with me. And if you stuck around until the end, I'm very grateful. Episode 3 will prove that pure being must be logos, why the necessary ground cannot be arbitrary, and what this means for natural law and science. And I really hope to see you then. Goodbye.